Welcome back. I'm Sam Hedden, and today we have a very special guest. He is a podcaster, a comic book maker. He also now has his own YouTube channel, and on top of that, he works with students in the local Twin Cities area. I am super excited for you to get to know our amazing guest, Nick. You know what? We're going to let him pronounce his last name because I'm terrible with names. So we're just going to let him do it. So
that's great.
I'll give it to you.
Yes, Nick PALODICHUK. Right.
PALODICHUK. See?
Right.
I would never. I'm terrible with names, unfortunately.
I've had a lot of practice, yes.
Well, I think we were just talking about announcing students' last names, and you're like, wait, how do you do this?
Yeah. I've had a student, I was mispronouncing her name entirely throughout the year. I was calling her Callie, and then the last day of school, she finally told me her name is Hallie.
Yeah, yes. And you're like, why didn't you say something earlier? So...
Correct. Yeah.
How long have you been working with students and doing the teaching type thing?
Actually, not as long as I've been podcasting. So,
wow.
Working with students for the last 5 years, but I've been podcasting for the last 10. I've actually hosted workshops about podcasting. I've done other previous shows with other members, but now exclusively I just podcast the St. Paul Filmcast, which you can find on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify.
Obviously, you're very good at this. You knew exactly what was going to be coming, so that's awesome.
Yeah.
How did St. Paul Filmcast come about? Like, where did that idea grow from?
Well, initially I had a previous podcast where it was just a friend of mine, and we just talk about movies. And eventually I just wanted to just stick with movies. Our topics were such a wide range, and I exclusively wanted to keep a narrow focus of just people in our area, because I knew a lot of people from the Twin Cities and Minnesota, Minneapolis area were making movies. So I thought it was an opportunity, a window to talk to them about making movies rather than have a typical podcast of people picking their favorite movies and just talk about it as fans, and rarely talk about filmmakers about making movies. Are far more interesting. And then I get to learn about making movies as well.
Have you ever thought of making your own movie now that you have all this knowledge over the last, did you say 10-ish years?
Well, the St. Paul Filmcast has been running for 3 years.
Okay, 3 years.
Yeah, and it was definitely, it's an interest of being an outsider looking in. And knowing filmmakers now, you get a sense of how the process works. I definitely personally, for making my own movie, I've put up a lot of personal hurdles to overcome. And not to mention, it is a group project. People think it's an isolated one person, but it is a collective group project. And I think if you're interested in making your own movie, you have to find a group of people to make a movie rather than yourself making a movie. So yes, it's a collective rather than just me making my own comic book. It's me and myself and nobody else being a judge, jury. So yeah, always interested in making stuff.
Your podcast is obviously very well known, especially in the Twin Cities. Anybody in the area that does films is usually either on your podcast or will be on your podcast.
Yes.
How did you start getting people to know more about it and getting them to like come to you and be like, hey, let's do an interview?
Actually, it was an interesting little accident. I was good friends with me making my own comic book, was good friends with CJ Renner, who actually written a comic book. And so one of my first guests was CJ. And just for his window is like, I'm not only making comic books, I'm making a movie. And I go, well, definitely. This is a movie-oriented podcast. I would love to have anybody that you work with as a movie on the show. And it just started as a little kernel like that, and it blossomed into a wide network that I appreciate. I've met so many fascinating people just because of that, and wonderful filmmakers and just wonderful people to come on my show, and nice enough to come into my studio to talk about their projects.
All right, we're back with Lee. We're just talking about, well, thanks for coming. Hey, thanks for having me on, man.
And
It's
thanks
a
for coming
pleasure.
again, because usually I'm the tallest person on the podcast, but you've superseded this, and this is an uncomfortable position for me. Before we get started, you'll also do some podcasts, and I want to mention that before we get started.
Oh, yeah.
So you're a podcaster as well. How could other people find your shows?
Well, if you go on Apple, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, look up the Fandom Podcast Network. It's a group of podcasts.
What is it again?
Fandom Podcast Network.
Okay, Fandom Podcast Network.
Yeah, it's actually a group of podcasts that we're all under one banner. But I'm the host of Blood of Kings. It's specifically devoted to Highlander, which I'm kind of a huge fan of.
I get it. So if people find the name of that,
Yeah.
they'll find under that umbrella the individual shows.
Yeah.
Oh.
And we all kind of guest star on each other's shows if we know anything at all about it. You know, I've been doing a lot of stuff on what we call couch potato theater, and it's basically movies that nerds nerd out about. One just posted today. We did the most recent Punisher movie. We're talking about Ray Stevenson's Punisher.
I like it for how
Me too.
bad it is. But it is.
Yeah, but it's good too. Like
I know.
Yeah,
I know.
It's how I envisioned the Punisher. You know, from the comic
Hanging
books.
upside down from a chandelier and spinning around shooting.
Yeah.
In the 90s, there are so many movies that are just gone. It's hard. I mean, everybody liked, what was the Ray Fiennes movie, Strange Days. And that was it was a great sci-fi movie.
Yeah, great concept, and when they killed what's her name, and she's like wearing the mesh and like experiencing her own murder from the eyes of her murderer. That was a mind twist. That was something you know, as a guy that, you know, loves movies so much that I'm in them, I'm always intrigued by something I've never seen before. And that one, mentally, I was not prepared for what that meant.
I mean, it was like already you're learning. He's talking about YouTube and virtual reality and how addicting can be, and how people can't divorce it from reality, and people get sucked into it and all this stuff.
And a great movie, you know.
And then it had a murder mystery involved with it. You're right, yeah.
Because that came out summer of '95, I think.
Yes, right when all that what everybody calls tech noir came out.
Yeah, because that was also the summer of Johnny Mnemonic.
There was great techno, the whole style of tech noirs back then, like 13th Floor and even Free. I would put Free Jack, but that's a little earlier.
So much of it was on the money about what we're experiencing now, and so much of it is, you know, fantastical. Because I mean, you look at Hackers, also '95, you know, and we don't quite live in that world, but it was an interesting look at. Something that, you know, we're living in is, you know, people, you know, making money illicitly off of online everything.
Right. I think in the Hackers, I mentioned, why physically go rob a bank? We can just do it right here in the comfort of our home.
Yeah. And then you don't have the weapons charge. You don't have assault and battery and all that other stuff. And
yeah.
Who's been some of your favorite? Not to like throw anybody particular under the bus or anything, but there's usually always a favorite. Who are a few of the ones that like stand out to you?
We actually had another person that worked with students, a teacher, Andrew Hunt, who works with NPR. It was a wonderful interviewer. I think I only got the word hello in my podcast when I had him on, and he was off and running. And that's what you like as a host, as a guest, to just go with it. And I learned a great deal because he's a teacher as well. He doesn't consider himself a filmmaker. He considers now himself a teacher that's giving his advice and process and guidance to other people's filmmaking. And you see it with him that it's not so much that he enjoys his movies, but he enjoys what his students are doing.
Where do you see your podcast going in the future? Or do you have any bigger plans to expand? You just told me that you're on a YouTube channel. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a different avenue. I had a previous guest on the St. Paul Filmcast, Kyle Gothy. He's a filmmaker blog, and he actually did a couple screenplays of movies. And we just clicked together because we are such fans, and different had the same interests, same kind of likes, but different also contrasts of different areas of movies in different areas. He's a lot younger than I am, so there's different avenues of movies he likes. So we're like, why don't we do not podcast, but why don't we explore a YouTube channel? Because I've already done a podcast. And yes, now we have a YouTube channel, Kyle and Nick on Film. You could find that. During the pandemic, I wasn't able to be with him, so he did a lot of his own episodes of just Kyle. But now they'll be able to record together. I'm back doing some episodes with them, and if you want to look it up, yeah, it's simple.
Hey, that's good. YouTube's usually simple, and that makes things a lot nicer for people to get to see that. I think it'd be nice to see your faces on top of, obviously, your voices instead of just one or the other. Yeah,
there's a lot of things we do agree on, and I think it's very much like Siskel and Ebert. There's a lot of things we don't agree on, and have different opinions, but it's not like we hate each other. We just don't always agree on stuff.
This is a very obscure movie from the 90s. It was panned by critics when it came out, and actually got a little bit of cult following later on. I've always been a fan of this movie, and I figured it was a chance to check it out. And not a lot of people critique this movie, and I think it's an opportunity for both Kyle and I to give it a little shout out and see what's all the fuss about. From a little cult movie from the early 90s, not really early 90s, more like mid-90s, when everybody loved these very flashy, I would say sleek suit noirs. That's kind of my
noir
thing.
was kind of in like a changing landscape at that point.
Yes,
I mean it kind of has to in order to survive, you know. And so for me, I'd heard of the title, maybe from the Tom Waits song that the title comes from. Yeah. I didn't really remember anything about the film. I don't really think I even knew about the film's existence except for the title. So when you brought this up as a pick for this week, I was really excited because, again, it's a brand new experience for me. Yeah. I love brand new experiences. I'm the guy who goes to every restaurant for the first time. So I was really excited to see the film and see a take from Gary Oldman. So I'm excited to talk about it with you today. This is Nick PALODICHUK, and I'm Kyle Gothi, and this is Kyle and Nick on Film. We're talking Romeo is Bleeding. Nick, why don't you understand with like the general plot here? You've watched it more often.
So the general plot of this movie, Romeo is Bleeding, is Gary Oldman kind of doing what he does best as a troubled person, but he's a cop, but he's a bad cop. And you're trying to root for a bad guy. He's all for about the money. Mm-hmm. And so he went
all about the women.
All about the women. There's 3 important women in his life, and we'll get into that a little bit. But predominantly, this is a Gary Oldman film, and it's one of the things that I actually appreciate about it. There's a great supporting cast as well. I mean, we talk about Ron Perlman actually makes an appearance of this. But you have Annabella Sciorra as his wife. You have Lena Olin as a bad guy. You have the very accomplished Roy Schneider making a bad guy. So
yeah, he was quite interesting to see. I didn't know he was in the movie, so I was like, whoa, okay, where's the shark?
So why do I like this movie that got harshly criticized? Well, I think it's a very footnote of noirs in the 90s, very over-the-top, exaggerated, and everybody wearing fancy suits. You see that in movies like Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead. You see that in Reservoir Dogs. You'll see that all through, even like Hard Boiled that came out in Korea.
Yeah.
Chow Yun-fat. So these, but I would say these sleek suits, over-the-top, exaggerated noirs. The other thing about noirs, it's a style. It's not a genre, so you can play with it and do anything you want, but this was the time of the era. One thing I'd like to point out is it's very gaudy.
Oh, yeah.
I forgot how I would watch it again. It's very gaudy.
Yeah, that was one of the first takeaways I had from the film. So I knew director Peter Medak from The Changeling, and I was kind of a big Species fan growing up, and he did the second Species film, which I commonly said is the best one.
The second one is the best one.
So I think I was kind of looking at this film like from a coming off of horror aspect, because that's where all of my Peter Medak knowledge came from. It is done in a very bloody, very visceral kind of a way.
Yeah.
I think, like you pointed out, this is Gary Oldman's film. Like, everything in the film relies on Gary Oldman. I think that's the part that works the best for me, is that this is one of those top tier level performances from Gary Oldman, which I think is great. The man is known now for being able to disappear into like Winston Churchill in Darkest Hour, or even be like in those popular films like the Harry Potter films, the Dark Knight films. What we forget is his ability to disappear without makeup, like become a completely different character who looks like all the other characters he played. It's a really great performance. I just don't think the movie is as good as the performance.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where like the elements, the individual elements, again, seem like they could work together really well. and I don't think it just connects the right way.
Right. There's pieces of this film that are fantastic. It's almost like a missing jukebox, but they don't really connect very well. In fact, the story is a mess. If you try to think out the story, it's a complete mess.
I did pause about halfway through, and I was like, I need another cup of coffee because I think I'm missing it. D.P. Darius Wolski, who did The Martian and Prometheus, for whatever problems you may have with those films, are shot gorgeously, and I think there is some really gorgeous cinematography in the movie. There's one scene in particular, or a shot in particular, that really got me, and that's just after a particular car crash sequence. Lena Olin's character is she's I think tied up, her hands are tied behind her back, and she gets out of this car in this really gorgeous tracking shot around the vehicle as like Gary Oldman's kind of recovering.
And it's really her. It's not a stunt.
It was incredible to watch. It was like a shot where just like if I had fallen asleep at that point, that shot would have woken me back up.
Yeah,
like it was a really powerful sequence. There's some really great lighting sequences, particularly near the end of the film, with some like mistaken identity situation that kind of takes place. I think the score, Mark Isham's score, is amazing.
So this is what I think really dominates it and really helps the movie, even though it's a bad script. But the sound effects and sound editing and sound placement, as well as the musical score, emphasize it and makes it much better. There's a time where she's seducing Lena Olin's character, Gary Oldman. And there's a certain charm of bells that rings that's almost like warning him this is a danger.
Is that when he first comes across her?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And also there's a second time where he confronts her, but there's sound effects of police and like sirens and everything, like warning him. So I think the sound department actually did a much better job emphasizing what needed to be placed in. Yeah.
It's a mixture of truly great elements with truly not great elements.
Yes.
Like we were pointing out, like the editing is all over the place, and it's from editor Walter Murch, who's done a lot of great editing work in the past. I maybe just don't think he had like either the right film to work with or just not the right pieces to place where he wanted to. I have a theory about the film. I think that the screenplay, which was written by Hilary Hankin, I think it was planned to be almost kind of a mock-up of film noir.
Yes, yeah.
And I think it was filmed as a straightforward film noir.
Yeah, so I think the sales pitch, and Hillary is a woman. A woman wrote the screenplay for this.
And you can see there's a feminist kind of take to like how he treats people and how it comes back to get him.
So so that would lead me to what movie have you guys completely agreed on, and what movie have you guys completely disagreed on? Like 100% totally different views.
We just did an episode of 7 Psychopaths, which I definitely regard as a good movie. I think it's a really well-written movie. I just don't think it's a great movie. I think it's just, there's a lot of mechanics with it. There's great casting, great ensemble casting, great story. But I think it just fails and it drags a little bit long, where Kyle essentially gives it a great, fantastic review. And from a writer's perspective, it is a wonderful movie. It's great dialogue and everything. But I just overall think it's just a good movie.
Hey, I mean, that's a good example of it's not even that you really disagree. You guys agree on some parts of it, so that makes complete sense. So that's fantastic. So anybody who's done a podcast interview with you has obviously seen your studio and the comic books that are there. I think that is fantastic. What got you into collecting these comic books?
It is kind of funny because people that are filmmakers and there's a filmmaking podcast come to my studio and it's surrounded by comic books and they don't really register. It doesn't fit together. But I think it's more similar than different. Comic books are very much like a storyboard. It's very much like a movie. It flows like a movie. It's just it doesn't have sound. Yes, comic books has always been a fascinating thing to me. When I was a kid, I had struggles reading. Textbooks were difficult. It looked taxing to me just to read a textbook. But comic books seem relatively fun because you get a visual and words picture. And so when I started collecting comic books at a young age in the early 80s. And in that time, it was considered almost distasteful media. If you were caught with a comic book in class, it was definitely regarded as almost a detention, almost vulgar. But nowadays, people accept it.
Right, graphic novels, it's usually something that people see and you're like, oh, well, they're reading, so that's great. That's a good thing. So that's fantastic. Since you asked me this and I had such a hard time answering it, who is your favorite comic book character?
If you want to go superheroes, definitely my automatic reflex has been Batman.
Batman.
Always been Batman. I've collected Batman, and maybe because I grew up kind of not really in poverty. I grew up poor, not impoverished, but poor, and I was fascinated by somebody who's wealthy beyond his means, could do anything, but in his spare time is running around the streets beating up bad guys.
All right, how about non-superhero?
Non-superhero.
Huh?
Oh, that's fascinating, isn't it? Non-superhero.
Yeah, that's right. That was the look on my face, by the way. For all of you that have heard the podcast, that was the look that I had.
There's a great comic book called Rat Queens.
Okay.
And you're going to catch me right here, but I don't know the characters' names. But as a collective, they're fun. And I like them. They're not really superheroes, but they're all female.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen often now, does it? I would imagine.
No, you look them up. They're called Rat Queens. They're kind of driven like rats, but it's wonderfully done comic book. If you want to put a superhero, my favorite kind of is like Constantine. He's not really a superhero. He's more of an anti-hero. Well,
sometimes anti-heroes can be superheroes that don't want to be superheroes, technically.
Yeah. Which is kind of funny because in Constantine, the movie, it's Keanu Reeves with dark hair, but in the comic book, he's got blonde hair.
Why?
I don't know.
I don't understand. So that leads me to you write your own comic books.
Yes, I do.
Can you tell us a little bit about the comic book you've been working on?
I started a comic book just writing it in 2008, just writing a story, a noir story, and hopefully it would turn into a comic book. That's how long. And finally, we completed it this summer, the whole project. So it was an epic, almost 260-page comic book.
Wow.
And you think, well, that doesn't seem taxing, but since 2008, I've had 3 jobs at the same time. I've done other avenues. I've rewritten this about 10 times. So yeah, it's a noir comic book. So it's not a superhero comic book. It's a noir comic book, and it takes place in 1968. So I did extensive research of what it was like in 1968, especially in St. Paul.
What gave you the idea for it?
It was a scene. It was a scene of what I did of a noir during a hockey tournament in the auditorium in 1968. And it kind of blossomed into that, almost like a vision, like a Brian De Palma movie of a murder mystery at the auditorium. But I didn't really have that aspect, but that was the start of it. That was the spark of it. And
you just rolled from there, and you just started going, and you're finally at that spot where you're like, it's actually there. It's done.
It's actually done. It was actually, I think my wife is more happy about it than I am. It definitely was a grueling process. Ever since I've been doing, anytime I had a free time, it was something I did. So it's always been in my mind since 2008. And now that I've given it birth and in the world, it almost seems like a relief. I'm glad I found a new project to work right away. That's the best thing about it, because if I didn't, I know I'll go back to it and start tweaking and messing with it. And since now I've got a new project to work on, I'm able to just leave it alone and move on.
Now, I have to ask, are you able to talk about this new project, or is that kind of hush-hush at the moment?
Actually, at this time, we could talk about it. A couple of weeks ago, we couldn't. But Wes Johnson, who's a local filmmaker here in the Twin Cities, did a short movie called Mercenary Kingdom. And he was on my podcast, St. Paul Filmcast, talking about it. And I mentioned to him off the podcast, this was actually, with the superheroes and stuff, would be a great comic book. And he goes, it should. You should draw it. And from there, we've been working on branching the universe of Mercenary Kingdom into a comic book series.
Ooh. If anybody has ever seen that particular short film, it's great. So I'm very excited to actually get to see something like on paper about it too. So that must be a wonderful project to get to like transition to.
Yes, definitely. And it fits into the kind of my ballpark of noirs and Batman, and very dark and very superhero, but grueling and very gritty.
Do you think it's going to be easier having a person to collaborate with, or do you think it might be harder for you to do that?
Actually, that's a good question. I think it's actually going to be a lot easier. I'm not doing the writing. I'm just interpreting the writing and using my illustrations. So yes, the process is actually much easier than me articulating my own writing and remembering what I mentioned before. Because when you write for yourself, you put your little footnotes, you put extra stuff in there. With reading somebody else's script, you just go, okay, that's what I have to use. So definitely, I only have one responsibility, and that's to illustrate it, not to write it. So yeah,
that's a good thing. That's always helpful. I'm going to ask you this anyways, even though I know the answer, but our listeners and our watchers may not know.
Okay.
Have you ever been in a film?
I believe so, yeah.
Are there any... So. I know that you were in one that I've been helping with, which is
yes, that's one. That's one, yes. And then I do a lot of extra work. So I believe I was an extra in a film last year. I don't think it's came out yet. I did a lot of PA work, production assistant work, and with Nathan Block's films. So yes, I've been on set on movies. I don't think you'll see my face a lot, but obviously a lot of my clothes or me in the background, if you notice. Yes.
Do you think that gives you some of the ideas that you get for your illustrations, like watching actors do what they do in front of the camera? Do you think that gives you some ideas for your comic books?
That's a great question. Yes, it does. I think when you watch your movies, you get an idea of how you present an angle in a comic book. And I think if a lot of more comic book artists watch movies rather than reading their own comic books, they'll get better ideas, because movies aren't framed like TV, like front center, or like this show where it's front center. Movies are framed differently, where you have to provide space to put your words in. So yeah, I think it's much more beneficial.
Well, that's perfect. I think that's great. So what is your comic book about? Can you give us some of the context to the storyline?
It's a murder mystery noir, and it's called The Greenway. And you can find it in indieplanet.com. That's a website, IndiePlanet, or your digital copy or hard copy. And it's very much like LA Confidential, very much like the old noir movies like Maltese Falcon, where you have two things going on at once. So you have like the bad guys, and then you concentrate on the investigation. So there's almost like two different things going on, as well as a gigantic ensemble cast as well.
That's insane. Where did you even get that idea?
I think if we're watching too much movies.
Is there any particular film that stands out to you that like really gave you that idea, or was it a compilation of films?
It's a lot of compilation films. So if you watch from 1968 Point Blank, there's a lot of influence from that. If you watch from 1968 The Detective, starring Frank Sinatra, if you watch The Maltese Falcon, there's an obscure Paul Newman movie from 1966 called The Harper, which he plays a private detective, and that has all of the ingredients, as well as LA Confidential. That's all the ingredients. If you like all that and put that in a big soup and mix it, you'll like my comic book.
Perfect. That sounds fantastic. I think people are going to love that. So where can we find your podcast? Where can we find your YouTube channel? And then once again, where can people find your amazing comic book that is finally ready for the masses?
All right. For the comic book, it's simple. Like I mentioned before, you can find it on indieplanet.com. That's a website. Just simply with the search engine, type my title, The Greenway, and you'll find it. The last book should be coming within the month. So you can find the first two books, and the last book is coming in August. It's all completed and done. We're just waiting for the publishing. You can definitely find the YouTube channel, Kyle and Nick on Film, here on YouTube. Just simply type in Kyle and Nick on Film. And the St. Paul Filmcast, you can find it on all major distributors from podcasts. I want to mention that my St. Paul Filmcast is family friendly. So definitely you can listen to it with your kids in the car and all that, and don't feel free that we're not going to get obscure or anything like that. So I make sure my podcast and all my content is family friendly.
Perfect. Do you have a website in general that maybe people could go to?
No, that's right. I should. I definitely should. I just one of those things I haven't got into because I've been so concentrated on my content. So no, I don't have a website yet, but you can find me on all social medias. I never go away from them.
All right. Perfect. Well, we'll be on the lookout for all of your amazing projects, and I'm very excited for everybody to get to see your comic book and all the work that you've been doing and listen to your podcast and see your YouTube videos. So that's fantastic. This has been Sam Hedden. You've met an amazing podcaster, YouTube channel founder, comic book writer. I'm Sam Hedden with producer Andy Watson. And now you know Nick PALODICHUK. I got it! Yay!
Or you can do it your way first, and then you can do it my way.
Shut up!